allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Today is Tuesday, November the 19th, 2019, 6 p.m. This is a regular meeting of the Greensburg Water Board called to order. To comply with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the city requests that participants in this meeting complete a voluntary anonymous survey that is available on the table in the back of the room. Roll call, Don.
Chuck?
Here.
Tony?
Here.
Frank?
Here.
Ryan?
Here.
Robin?
Here. The minutes from October 15th meeting were distributed in your packet. Is there any corrections or objections to the minutes as distributed? Not, that will be accepted. New business, HNTB update. Darren?
Good evening. Kind of give you an update of where they're at. They are still making pretty good progress. The weather's going to start slowing down a little bit, and you'll see some pictures here of some of the things they're utilizing for cold weather, concrete pours, and stuff like that. They're still moving along pretty well. They're pouring usually about twice a week, which is pretty good. And I know they think they have a pour either today or yesterday. And I know they got one scheduled for next week. They'll be only working 3 days next week. So, but they're moving along there. And the following week, first week in December, another sub's going to come on, Bruns and Gutzweiler. That's doing a lot of the masonry, concrete block, and the brick. Now, obviously, we're not ready for brick, but on the clear well, they have some internal baffles, and those are concrete blocks, so that'll probably be the first they lay. And then one of the pours they're looking to do next week would be for the slab for the pump and electrical building. And once that slab's poured, then that building itself would be a block, laid up block building as well. So that would give them another place to start. So we'll see how that goes. We do have a meeting with them the first week in February following that to kind of meet with the Bruns and Gutzweiler as their sub on some of the masonry things we're looking for to make sure everybody's on the same page. We have a lot of what they call pre-construction when a new sub comes onto the job site, so that we get an idea of what they're planning and make sure everybody's on the same page. We do that for we do it for masonry is one of them, as well as we also did it for some of the pre-stressed concrete as well. There's a couple other ones we do as well. So I think cost-wise with this pay request that's before you tonight, there the third one there, I think we're right around 14%. Again, it's a lot of the concrete works up front, so we're tracking okay on that as well. So, and I will start with some slides here. Here we are. This is the clear well. They are pouring, getting ready to place concrete. Actually, the picture didn't show, but the yellow hose coming down here is actually part of the pumper truck, I think, there. Maybe not. I don't think that's right either. So that's just how they poured that. The columns there, they were pouring pre-stressed walls on the outside, and there's about 3 columns the short side of the tank, and they're spaced about every 20 feet apart. And so as they work their way across, as they pour the walls, they're also pouring these individual columns as well. Again, here's the second pour. Again, you can kind of see they're up there. replacing that concrete. They did use a pumper truck to pour that. And the other things to point out, you can see all the blue again is the tensioning wire, and the white is also a conduit that has tensioning wire in it as well. And then of course you got your standard rebar. So there's quite a bit of steel in these tanks, and it's about 17 feet tall, depth-wise. So they're having a little trouble. They've had a little bit of honeycombing, which is basically where the concrete does it. They didn't get it vibrate well enough, and there's little kind of holes in it. I'll show. I got a couple pictures of it here that they've had to do a couple repairs. We did meet with our structural to get a repair program so that if they did encounter it, they can make the repairs.
How thick are the walls there?
I believe these are 14 inches. I think that's right, 12 or 14.
Now, is this that
This is
850,000
the-
gallon clear well?
Yeah, this is the big 850,000 gallon clear well tank. So it may be 12 because it is tension, so it's not quite as thick, I don't think. So I can find that out. I don't know for sure. And then here's the pour, and if you look at, you can kind of see a little bit of spot of the honeycombing that they had here. And at this point, they've come in and they've cut around it, and they have to notch it out so they get a clean break, and then they have to get down to some solid concrete there. And then from there, they put on a bonding agent, and then they use a grout that's designed for making those types of repairs. The other thing to point out, I guess, is they got this circular tank, and then they come back, and part of this when they cover it up, they pour another exterior wall here about a foot tall and about 10 or 12 inches. Well, it's about a foot by a foot that anchors that wall. They pour that on both sides, so a lot of that gets covered up anyway, so down to bottom. And here's the repair, same location that the patch being made. So unless I told somebody, you probably would never be able to see it once you go out there again.
And that's just aesthetic, right?
Yeah, for the most part. The design is that you want to try, if there is little gaps in there, you want to get the wall to full thickness, and so you don't want to give a place for any water to get in and penetrate and start trying to deteriorate the concrete. So it's more for protection of the rebar inside as well. Here's just another shot is forming up those walls as well. If there's anything there that's unusual. This is kind of pilaster. This is where all those cables that they're tensioning the walls with they all come to one location, and that's what these little blocks here is where they'll pull and tension it from. So, and then these pilasters are thickened and they get poured as well down the road. So it's just kind of a unique photo, I thought. Now we go on to the pump and electrical building. This is obviously below the electrical room, so you can see how many conduits and stuff that come into. Again, this room here is kind of where the main power from the utility company will come in, and then there'll be panels there, and it gets distributed out to all the various locations on the project site. So this is kind of the center hub for all the electrical feed and conduits coming in. So you get an idea of how many there is, a bunch there. No, I flipped back on it. Sorry, this is another poured a wall that have a clear well. Got that one out of order. Sorry about that. Now we're back in pump electrical. They're backfilling around the tank. They're required to put about 4 feet of stone around each of the facilities to protect them from upheaval and that sort of thing. So that's what they're doing here. And then this is the pump and electrical building. Obviously it's fairly recent because there's snow on the ground. This is the top of this will be basically the finished floor slab will be poured on top of these walls here. What you can see, this area right in here is the pump and the electrical room. This box back here is the clear water wet well where the pumps will pull water from. And then this area over here is kind of they squared off the building, and we have the blowers will sit above here as well. But there will be a wall dividing this building in half from right across here. And everything in the forefront will be the electrical room, and then everything in the back there will be the pump room. And now we're looking inside that wet well of the pump and electrical room. And each of these notches is it's a baffle. It's designed to distribute to flow equally to the pump well case are the intake structures will all be lined up, aligning with one of these slots here. So the idea is that as the water will come into this channel over here, it gets distributed equally, so that when the pumps pull on, you don't have one pulling harder than the other on it, and it gets equal amount of flow. And now we've backfilled all that area. Now we're putting in the drain lines for the pump building here. And these are some of them. This piping here and then that piping back here. This is the backwash effluent. Effluent. And then this one up here is the finished water going out to the distribution center. And once the building's up inside, then all the header piping will connect to these stub out lines going out. The white lines obviously are drain lines. Now we go over to the water treatment plant. Number 4, you get an idea they're still forming up here. Here what they're doing is that white ribbon type of thing is water stop. They're getting ready to get it in place for when they make the pour. So it's there. Now, once they pour the concrete, while the concrete's still wet, then that water stop gets put into the concrete. So half of it's in. It's basically a water stop where they have a control joint, a construction joint, so that water won't, where we're pouring 2 slabs together, the water won't penetrate through that. It stops at the water. It's a water stop, so it keeps it watertight. Let's see anything else on there that's worth a note. I don't think so. Here they're pouring. One of the first pours for the filter foundation, and it's just a at-grade foundation slab pour, and then the walls will come up to support the filters. And the other thing to point out, you'll see a lot of these in photos from here on out. These are what they call insulating blankets. After they get done pouring the concrete, then they will cover the concrete so that it will keep its temperature, hold its temperature at night, so that it helps cure and it doesn't freeze. So that's one of the mechanisms they use. They also have some additives in the concrete during cold weather as well. And here's the pour after it's done. You can see how they've tucked the blankets back in there and protected that. So that's one of the things that slows them down a little bit when it gets cold weather. You know, when you have the warmer weather above freezing, you don't have to do these type of activities. And we'll see this here. They are starting to set the slab floor for the water treatment plant. I don't know a time frame when they hope to make that first pour on the slab itself, but they got quite a bit of work left to get that ready. Here's a backwash line connection to the water treatment plant. The only thing to point out there is it's all ductile iron. You can see it's bagged here. It's got a polyethylene bag on it, and that's really designed to protect the pipe if the soil would ever get corrosive. The the ductile iron. It's an added protection to help that. It's pretty cheap insurance, so to speak. Here's the finished water line going out from the from the pump station, and this is going out to 4th Street. We're heading toward 4th Street. Plant number 3 is back here. The new clear well is back over here, and the new plant will be back over here. A couple things, you can see the bagging this line as well. This blue and white tape is a marking tape. It's magnetic. Basically, if somebody starts digging in the area and they hit this tape, it's a warning tape to know that there's a buried utility below that, so they know it's something's. They do it about a foot above the pipe, so that when they start digging and if they hit the tape, they need to stop right away. I think it does have magnetic, and I think sometimes you can hook a locator to it as well to trace it somewhat. Here they are finishing up that line. They came up to 4th, and then they also make a run, another 12-inch run up to tie into Ireland Street that runs parallel. They still need to go out and tie actually into the street, but they stopped it short, so they get all this work. And then when they actually have to get the plant in operation to make the tie into the distribution, they only have to do it right out there on the road. So that'd be sometime down the road. But they got the bulk of that out of the way for them. And here's another connection. Again, just showing you connecting to the. You can see that they're actually cast in a piece of wall sleeve here that actually gets bolted, the pipe and the joint gets bolted to there to anchor that to place. Again, some more effluent, filter effluent. Again, you can see we got the tape on there as well as the bag as well. I think this is from an earlier, probably a month or so ago. This is one of the chemical feed. This is the effluent line. There's a couple of those lines we saw going out. This is the last location. There'll be a static mixer inside that. It'd be the last location for Rick to monitor turbidity, pH, chlorine residual, and then there'll be some feed points so that he'll be able, if he has to make an injection, this is one of the last locations before it goes out to distribution that he not only can add chemicals but also monitors. And that's the inside of that, and there's the spacer put in place. They don't have inline mixer yet, but they got the laying length of the spacer. Any questions? Sorry, that's pretty dry stuff. One of these days we'll get some buildings and stuff like that. It'll be a little funner.
How many pounds of rebar do you think?
Oh, good. I don't know. I was looking at another project, the flat rock intake that we did a couple of years ago, and I was looking at a summary of that this morning, and I think it was like 900 cubic yards of concrete for that entire job. Well, the slab for that clear well was 330 plus yards, so that gives you an idea that there's a lot of concrete on this project compared to some of the other ones. So yeah,
Can they pour up till freezing?
yeah, they can do a couple things. They can pour. You can pour concrete when it's humid for the supplier he can heat the water, he can heat the stone, so that it comes out a little warmer, and then once they place the concrete, the chemical reaction generates enough heat so that if you have an insulated area, it will generate heat to cure the concrete, so it doesn't, if it gets below 0, probably not going to pour because it's just too hard on the equipment and the man as well. But they will pour down to, if it's in the 20s, they'll still pour. Now on the block in masonry, that typically with the grout and that sort of thing, they can do that, but typically what they'll have to do, they'll have to build a tent, a big plastic tent, so to speak, and then they'll have supplemental heaters in there to keep the temperature up to a certain degrees, and then they can continue working on that. So there are things that will allow them to work all winter. Hopefully we don't usually around here anymore, they won't stop until, well, I could probably say, it gets below in the teens, they ain't gonna do a whole lot, I can tell you that. I mean, it's just too cold. For one thing, a lot of their hydraulics on machines will not function very well when they get that cold, so if it gets that cold, there won't be a lot going on. I know this past one, a couple of months, they had a couple rain days, and Rick Ledden, they were building some forms in the north building, and the superintendent thanked me 3 or 4 times and been very appreciative you allowed them to work so those guys didn't have to work in the rain. So they were able to work out in that building, so they can work around a few things. They've given me no indication that they are going to, pull off the job for a month or anything like that. They plan to work all winter.
Is that is that all detected just by eye, or do they use a?
It's for our purposes. It's by sight, by visual. And so when they strip the forms off, they go around do a visual inspection, on both sides of it, and if they find anything. And it's really, they haven't had much. It usually happens in a place either where they can't get the mechanical vibrator down there to really vibrate it. Obviously, we got a lot of steel in there on these walls, and sometimes it's just hard to get it down there. It typically happens at the base where it's deep, like the tall tanks, or at corners, or another place that happens. We saw a couple of the wall sleeves where they got the pipe. Well, as you're working your way down, you can't get the vibrator directly down below that open pipe or that wall sleeve. So underneath that, sometimes this is where we look for, see it doesn't get us vibrating as well. So far, it's been pretty surface. I think there's been three instances where they've had to do, and most of the spots have been no bigger than this area right here, type of thing. So. Other questions?
What's the useful life of this plant? Expect?
I won't say 100. Most of the structures will be 50 plus. Piping is usually about 75. Pumps are about 20. Chemical feed stuff is in the 15 to 20 year range. That's kind of the industry standard. Sometimes you get more or less out of that, but usually you look for buildings that get you somewhere 50 to 75 years. And underground piping usually is 75 plus. I mean, there's utilities that out there that have got pipe that's over 100 years, in the ground that's still functioning very well. Your mechanical equipment, that's usually 20 years is about the best you can hope out of that. It's usually somewhere less than 20. So that's generally that you see it. Unfortunately, it's kind of like your house. Your house will live, but your water heater's going to go out every 5 to 10 years. It's any type of piece of equipment like that. It's got a certain amount of useful life. Other questions? Thank you.
Thanks, Darren.
Thank you.
Thanks, Darren. Rick, what do you got for us, man? Hey, wait, I didn't see you on the
Yeah.
Oh, just a little update. Darren was talking about the concrete. There's 4,000 cubic yards on this job. So he was talking about the river project had 900. And talking to Steve about a week and a half ago, he had poured a little over 1,500 cubic yards. So he's probably about halfway done with the concrete. Just for information. Last month I come to you about the beacon on the tower, light out. I know you gave me permission to spend up to $5,000 to get that. Mike with MadTech was kind of shooting from the hip. He can't do it for that. He said that replacing the top. Anyway, I went out there and looked at it just to make sure that the control, because he mentioned that the controls, as long as there wasn't anything wrong with it. Well, Frank, if I flip the switch to daylight, the beacon works. So it's something, the lights aren't burnt out, and it's something inside the controller. So if we was to replace or go to the LED lights, does that controller come with it? Or is that controller something separate? Because I think I do know the problem's in the controller itself now. It's not the lights on top. Well, I just figured this out yesterday, and I called Mike, I said, Mike, and the reason I figured it out, I was up there messing with it last week.
Up
And
there?
somehow I accidentally, no, absolutely not.
He's on the ground, he's not up there up top.
I was messing with the control panel to make sure, you know, to see if I could find something that wasn't, I'm not an electrical guy by no means. But somehow I actually flipped that switch to daylight and didn't realize that I had done it. Well, Brian Reed had called the next day and said, hey, your light's flashing white all night, and kept us awake. So I guess it just brightens his whole house up. So that's how I knew that the light was actually working in it and the problems in the control box. So I did get a hold of Mike with MadTech, and he's supposed to go up there and look in that control box, so maybe we can get it fixed for a lot cheaper.
A
So.
lot cheaper for lights are good.
Right. And the lights are working. I flipped them both ways and drove back, and both the white and the red are working. So
I think like
it's just
Eric
not
said,
working in auto.
I think the red is sufficient you're under the radar anyway.
Yeah, we're not in the footage, you know, the height that we're having to necessarily have it.
You've got a problem if it stays on red, so it's not an emergency.
Right.
But the color may be a lot cheaper.
Yeah. So I'll have something for you next month on that. That's all I got. Thanks.
Thank you.
Anybody else got anything to bring forth board tonight? Well, wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving.
Dude.
We'll be back in December.